All right, I think we're off. Hi, everyone. So let me kick off with a quick intro. My name's James Dales. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I work for a data consultancy, Altius, based out of London. And I'm going to talk to you today about mapping in Power BI. And the good news is, I've hardly got any PowerPoint slides whatsoever. We're pretty much going to do the whole session end-to-end in the form of a big, long demo. I've just got a few slides to kick off. So my plan is to walk through all of the different visuals that we have in Power BI. So I'm going to start off with the out-of-the-box visuals related to mapping, obviously. So we've got 4 different visuals that we can use in Power BI for maps that come with Power BI Desktop without us having to download another visual from the marketplace. We have Filled Map, the very imaginatively named map, Shape Map, and the ArcGIS Maps from Esri. So the first one of those is the Filled Map, which draws a choropleth map. Now, a choropleth map, for people who aren't that familiar with the terminology, basically draws a map with different shapes, boundary areas that are color-coded based on your data. But the thing about the filled map is it's got a predefined set of boundaries built into it, which I think if you live here in the United States, you're probably fine. You've got all of the states loaded in, you've got counties in there, I don't know, probably lower levels of geography as well. You're sorted. But if you're from anywhere else in the world, it's pretty much a no-go. For example, from the UK, where I'm based, the lowest level of granularity we get to drill down to in the filled map is England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. That's not a lot of use. So I'm going to skip over filled map today. It's pretty obvious what it does. We're going to have a look at some other visuals instead, which give us the same capability, but with the ability to specify a lot more granular geographies. Now, the map, which is based on the Microsoft Bing Maps technology, is probably your go-to map for most scenarios. And it draws circles on the map, or pie charts, but please don't do that. And most recently, it's also had the ability to draw heat maps added to the visual as well, along with some additional background layers. So it used to just do normal street maps or satellite mapping, now with some additional types in there as well, including the gray background that I'm showing here on the slide. But there's a major limitation with the out-of-the-box map visual, and that's the fact that it will only display 3,500 data points. So if you've got 5,000 points that you want to show on the map, this map visual won't do that. So we'll have a look at some strategies for getting around that shortly. And then the next visual is the shape map. So the shape map, similar to the filled map, draws choropleth maps, so filled in boundary data. But the difference here is you don't have the ability to overlay that on top of a normal map. You can still scroll around and zoom in if you want to, but you're not going to get a street map underneath it. But it does have one major advantage, and that's the ability to upload your own bespoke geographies. So I don't know, if you work in a government department and you've got your own particular geographies, or perhaps a sales team with your own sales territories, then you can load those territories into this map and display your choropleth map. This map, however, is still in preview. I think it's been in preview for 2.5 years. I suspect it will never come out of preview. And we'll have a look at why I think that is as well. And then finally, we're going to have a look at the ArcGIS Maps from Esri. So the ArcGIS Maps kind of come in 2 modes. You get the free offering, and then there's the plus version, which gives you more capabilities. And then there's more capabilities on top of that if you have your own ArcGIS subscription in your organization. We're not going to spend too much time on ArcGIS Maps, but we will have a look at how to build choropleth maps in ArcGIS as well. So let's take this opportunity to jump out of PowerPoint, and we'll kick off our first demo. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever seen me present before, but I like to start my demos from scratch. So I'm going to open up a blank Power BI desktop file, and I thought it'd be quite useful anyway for you guys to see the data preparation stages anyway. So, I mean, it's all relevant to creating maps. You need to have your data in the right format before you can present it on the map. So we need some data to load into our report. So I've decided to use some open data. I'm sticking with the UK, so I can at least talk with some authority and not spend the next hour blagging. So I've gone to a website called data.police.uk, and what this site allows me to do is download really granular level crime information for all of England and Wales. So I've downloaded 5 years worth of crime data for the 2 police forces that cover London, so the Metropolitan Police and City of London Police. And what that gives me is a great big zip file which contains a folder for every month of every year, and in each of those folders we get a CSV file for each of those forces for that month's crime data. So that's what I'm going to use as the basis for our demos, or at least the first set of demos. So let's load that data in. I'll try and do this quite quickly. It's not a Power Query session, but we will at least go through the process. So I'm going to use the folder data source, and I'm just specifying that top-level crime folder that's got all of those subfolders in. Hit Edit to take us into Power Query. So initially we get a row for each one of those CSV files in each of the subfolders, and I'm just going to use the merge function to combine all of those files into one CSV file, or sorry, into one table. All of those files have the same format. So now we can see the fields that are in those CSV files, and we're just going to do some very quick cleanup. So I'm not worried too much about the file name or this ID. We are going to keep the month, so when the month in which that crime occurred. Not too worried about which police force. Now, given this is a map session, obviously we're going to keep the longitude and latitude. I've also got this location table, this location field rather, and what this contains is might sound like it's something that could be useful for plotting on the map, but actually it's a really generic description. So on or near parking area is not enough information to allow us to plot that on the map. But actually this field will become useful, and we'll see that a bit later too. The next field is going to be pretty key as well, an LSOA code. Now this doesn't probably mean much to an American audience, and frankly it doesn't mean much to most of the British audience either. But what this is a statistical geography code. So in the UK, we have an organisation called the Office for National Statistics, and they break down the geographies in the UK into lots of different types of hierarchy. And LSOA stands for Lower Super Output Area, but it's basically quite a granular breakdown of specific areas in the UK. It's like a group of zip codes, I guess. The naming, though, is pretty generic, so let's lose that. And we'll just remove those last 2 columns. So we've got the crime type. Now I'm just going to do one further transformation to make life a little bit easier. I'm going to add a new column on the end called crime count, and just hard code that to the number 1. It will just give us a really easy way of counting up all of those crimes rather than worrying about row counts. So each row in this data set corresponds to an individual crime. So let me just change the data type to that for whole number, and we'll set that off loading. The other thing about this data set, which is going to make it quite a good demo data set, is it's pretty big. So you saw all the folders. If I right-click on that and have a look at the properties, we can see that actually it's a gigabyte's worth of CSV files. So it's not, insignificant amount of data that we're loading in. That does, however, mean it's going to take a few moments to load. And what I usually find is the bigger the audience, the longer it takes to load. I don't think there's any correlation with the size of the data. It's how many people are watching it load. But we're nearly there. We're into this time last year. So we've got about 6 more months to go. There we are. That wasn't too painful, was it? So if we just have a quick look at that to make sure it's loaded, you can see, hopefully just about down in the bottom right-hand corner, we've loaded in just over 5 million rows of data. So now we're ready to build our report. So let's just check that the crime data makes sense quickly. Let's just add a quick line chart in there. We will get to some maps in a minute, I promise. And let's have a look at that over time. So we can see that, in fact, if we add a trend line in there, we can see that actually the newspapers are probably right. Crime is going up. And let's add in a heat map as well and break that down by crime type. So we can see that antisocial behavior is making up most of the crime in the UK, but actually it's going down, whereas violence and sexual offences are sadly going up. Okay, so now we can see how our crime is broken down. We're ready to add in our first map. So I'm going to start off with the map visual, which is this icon here. Don't confuse it with the very similar ArcGIS Maps icon down here. So let's add our map in. And first of all, I'm going to drag in the latitude and longitude fields, given these are our two fields that actually relate to geography. And you can see, firstly, the curious thing is it's plotted crime all over England and Wales, despite the fact I only downloaded crime for the two London police forces. So actually this is a case where plotting information on the map actually can reveal something about your data that you wouldn't necessarily expect or know. I think the reason for this, incidentally, is I think that these crimes have occurred all over the UK, but they've been reported to a police force in London. So people have suffered a crime, maybe when they're on holiday, come back home and then gone to the police to report it. So I'm now going to drag in the crime count field, and so that each of these circles should then grow to show the amount of crime in each of those areas. And then something even more strange happens, is now we're just looking at crime in London. Where did all of those other crimes go, just because I pulled in the crime count? You know, every single one of those rows will at least have the value number 1, because you saw me hard code it. Now this is where that 3,500 row limit comes in. You can see that we've got this indicator now at the top of the visual, telling us that we've loaded in too many rows of data. So now Power BI is taking a representative sample of that data and just showing me 3,500 points on the map where it thinks is a fair spread of data. But obviously we've lost a whole load of detail here, so you've got to be really careful when you're using maps, particularly this visual, that you actually are getting a sample of what it's showing. So we need a strategy to overcome this. This is not a safe way to be showing this map. And one of those strategies is to aggregate our data up through a geographic hierarchy. And we, fortunately, in our data set, as well as having that really granular longitude and latitude, which specifies the actual location where the crime occurred, we've also got this LSOA code, which effectively is a more general location that describes a higher region in London where that crime occurred. What I'd actually like to know, though, is which London borough, which local authority in London has the highest or lowest amount of crime. So I'm going to pull in a lookup file, which is just a very simple CSV file with just 2 columns in it. And it has one column containing that LSOA code and another column containing the corresponding London borough that location's within. Let's use the first row as headers so we get some column headers, and I'm going to load that in. And now, before I can use that, I just need to create a relationship between those 2 tables. So if I drag LSOA code from my crime into the LSOA code on my lookup file and create that relationship, now when I jump back to the map, you can see I've got my new table here. I can pull in the London borough into the location table, and bang, our visual's broken. It's all right, I was expecting that. What we need to do here is change our latitude and longitude fields so that the aggregation type becomes average rather than do not summarize. And then what that's done is it's averaged all of those longitude and latitude points within each London borough. So effectively, it's found the centroid point of all of those different crimes within each borough And it's now giving me one circle per London borough, sized by the amount of crime in that borough. And interestingly, we've got this one circle now outside of London, near a place called Hemel Hempstead. And if we click on that, or rather hover over that, we can see that the borough is blank. So all of those crimes that occurred outside of the UK don't have a corresponding borough to look up, so it's averaged out all of those longitudes and latitudes, and it turns out that Hemel Hempstead is the centre of crime in the UK. Does anybody live there? No, we're safe. That also gives us the opportunity now to filter out all of those crimes that have occurred outside of London. So I'm going to drag London Borough into my filter pane, and I'm just going to unselect blank. So now that's got rid of Hemel Hempstead, and we're just focusing on London. The next thing I'm going to do, it's quite hard to tell, based on these circle sizes, which of those boroughs have got a higher or lower amount of crime. So I'm just going to apply some conditional formatting very quickly. Now, since they've changed the way the interface works on this, I find this feature a little bit hidden. So if you move over default color here, when you mouse over it, you can see these three little dots appear. If you click on that, that enables the conditional formatting option. And that allows us now to set up coloring based on our crime count. So in the interests of accessibility, let's not do red and green. Let's do yellow through to, say, dark blue. And now we get our colors circled so that we can see the really big dark blue circle is where most of the crime is. So let me hover over that. And we can see that's the borough of Westminster. So what I want to do now is drill into Westminster and find out whereabouts the crime is occurring in Westminster. So let's pull in our other geography fields that we've got and create a hierarchy in location. So I'm going to pull in our LSOA code and place it under borough. And I'm also going to pull in our location field. Even though it's got a very generic description, when we're looking at it in the context of those locations within a LSOA, then they become fairly unique within that area. So having done that, I can now use the drill down functionality that's been enabled on the visual by creating that hierarchy. Click on Westminster, and we'll drill in to that LSOA level. And we can see now there's a bit of an area over here on the right-hand side that's got more crime, and this circle looks to be the biggest, so let's drill in one level down. And we can see really that there are just two areas in Westminster responsible for all of that crime within this LSOA, which appears actually to be next to Regent Street, if anybody's visited London. And if I click on this one, and if we just very quickly change those visual interactions so that our heat map filters based on the circle I've selected. So we can see here, let me mouse over, that it's on or near a shopping area, and the crime in that area is mainly theft from the person, other theft, or shoplifting. If we have a look at this other circle over here, which is apparently a nightclub, we've got theft again, but also violence and sexual offences. So we've gone from having a map with just a random splurge of green all over it to now, still within the same map visual, being able to get some quite interesting insights into that same data set just by configuring the map a little bit more precisely. Now that's all very well, but if I zoom back up to London Borough level, for me this isn't a particularly effective way of representing the crime over large areas. Putting a circle in the middle of the boroughs, whilst it works, it's probably not a great representation. So I'm going to have a look at a potentially better, or certainly different way of doing that, and I'm going to pull in the shape map visual. So let's put it underneath, and we'll configure that quickly. So we're going to pull in the borough field into location, and I'm going to pull in crime count into color saturation. And usefully, we get presented with a map of America. You guys have it easy. But the good thing about this visual, as I mentioned earlier, is whilst the predefined set of boundaries that are built into it are really limited, and look again, here we have England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. That's not going to help me analyse crime in London. But I do have the option to bring in my own bespoke geography. And the format of data we need to use to bring in these is a format called topo.json. So this is a file which will contain a whole series of longitude and latitude points which effectively describes the boundaries of each London borough. So let's bring our local authority boundary in. And you can see now America has been replaced with each of the London boroughs in England. And I can very quickly format this visual. So let's use the same color scheme, blue through to dark blue. And we can see that here we've got Westminster sticking out. And actually, because we now get an actual sense of how much space each of those London boroughs take up, we get a much better sense for how that crime spread across London. I just want to show you something, though, because it's very difficult to find boundary data in topo.json format. GeoJSON is a much more prevalent format, but also probably most people have format in Esri shapefiles and other types of boundary data. Fortunately, there's a website called MapShaper.org, which is a free site, and in here you can upload boundary data in different formats, all of those which I've just described, and import that data in. It's worth doing this even if you've already got topo.json data, because I think the reason that this shape map visual hasn't made it out of preview is most of the time these geographies are described in really high detail. You know, those boundaries are really precise. They might go down the middle of a street and then down a river. You know, they're really, really detailed. And if you load a lot of that data into Power BI, particularly into that shape visual, it really can't cope with it, and it freezes, and it will hang your report, it potentially hang your browser or Power BI desktop. So what we need to do, once we've loaded our data into MapShaper, is this option here on the top right called Simplify. Now before I do that, let me zoom in a little bit and choose Simplify. And what we get is a slider, and as we slide that across, it's removing a lot of the detail out of our polygons. So you can see I can go all the way to the right and then they become way too simple. So what you need to do is kind of find a balance somewhere between really detailed and really not detailed that gives you enough detail that it makes sense for your polygons, so you don't lose too much definition. But even if you just reduce it a little bit, you're going to shrink the size of those files, shrink the complexity dramatically, and then they'll perform much better inside of Power BI. Okay, so there's a couple of techniques I want to use in conjunction, though, with this shape map, because this visual doesn't support drill down. So what I'd actually quite like to do is also see our low super output areas based on here. What I can do is click on each of these, and if I drill down our main map at the top to the LSOA level, you can see as I click on each borough, our main map gets filtered to that particular borough that we've clicked on. So let's use that, but instead of having it above our report, I'm going to create a new page, quickly paste our map in. I'm going to make it small, and you'll see why in a second. I'm going to turn this page into a report page tooltip. So let me turn that on and change the page size to tooltip. Let's remove that title to give us a bit more space. Fill all of our new, very small page. So now, if I drag our borough field onto our tooltip field section here, go back to our shape map. Now when I hover over each of those shapes, we get a tooltip with the more detailed level of granularity underneath. And that doesn't just work with the normal map. We can flip that out as well. So let's take that off and use a shape map to do the same effect. So this time I'm going to drag in LSOA and put crime count in here. Very quickly load in, this time instead of our local authority boundaries, I'm going to use that LSOA level. Now interestingly, the first thing you might notice on this is despite the fact we've got crime in every single one of those LSOAs, there's a load here grey, not coloured. And again, that's because we've hit the maximum limit for that visual. There are more LSOAs than the 1500 row limit that this visual will present. But that won't actually matter for what we want to do with it. Let me just change the colour scheme as well. I know these things aren't necessarily that important, but if we zoom back. Now when I mouse over here, instead of getting, oh, one more setting I need to change. This is quite hidden. I don't know that most people know that this exists. Under Shape Map, there's a really neat function, which is auto zoom. Most of the time, it's not that useful. But when you use it as a report page tooltip, what that means is it will zoom in on the particular area that you're highlighting and give you a nice detailed shape map of that more detailed area. Yes? For that to happen, yeah, sure. So let me jump back. So because we are highlighting on our main map the London Borough, I've dragged in with the page itself, so not the map, but the page selected. That gives us a, let me take it off so you can see it, a tooltip field section here. You need to turn on tooltip under the page information, and then this area appears, and I've just dragged in borough because it's the borough that we're using to highlight, even though we're showing different information. And that's on the page. And actually, whilst I'm just showing a map in here, I could also bring in, a card visual and show the number of crimes in that particular London borough, or a line chart as well, so we can see the trend over time and combine, use the main map to choose which borough you want to look at, and then have more than one visuals in that tooltip. So let's move away from those two visuals, and still sticking with the theme of crime, I'm going to have a very quick look at the ArcGIS Maps visual. Now, there's so much functionality in this visual, we could probably do a whole 60-minute session on how to do this. So instead, I'm just going to stick with our choropleth maps and have a look at how we create those in ArcGIS. But ArcGIS will draw heat maps, it will draw circles. There's all sorts of capabilities we can do in here. So I'm going to drag in borough into location, and I'm going to drag crime count into color. And what I need to do now, so interestingly, again, for those of us outside the UK, have a real issue with geocoding. Despite the fact all of my data is based on London, I get all of my points shown in America, and that's fair enough, right? I know that in America, a lot of the town names are borrowed from places in the UK. It's just history. But they always show as the default. But that's okay, because when we come to do boundaries in the ArcGIS map, we get to choose the country that they relate to. Now, the formatting options in this map aren't where they are for most of the other visuals in Power BI. Instead, we have to click on the three dots at the top and choose Edit. And then that expands the map to fill the whole report page, and we get a much more advanced set of mapping options. So we can do things like choose a different map layer, and we get 4 of those free background layers built in. We are going to show our locations not as points, but as boundaries, and our data is in one country, which is not the United States in this case. It's the United Kingdom. And we are looking at districts. So we're actually specifying what type of boundaries our data relates to, because the ArcGIS map has a huge number of boundaries from all around the world automatically built in. So I'm not needing to load in my own bespoke boundaries for this, because ArcGIS already understands what local authorities are. So hit OK. And now straight away, we've got all of our London boroughs represented in here. Incidentally, I'm using local authority and borough because in London they mean the same thing. And we can change the color scheme in here as well. So let's go to something that is a little bit closer to what we had before. So now I go back to my report, and as we've been doing before, I can click on the different areas and navigate around my report. The only thing is, though, I mean, it's nice that we've got a choropleth map on top of a street map, so I can zoom in, and see exactly what this area relates to. But the Esri map doesn't yet support some of the native features of Power BI, like report page tooltips, or drill through, or drill down even. So I can't now go from this and drill down to my LSOA level. So it's really a case of picking, which map or combination of maps is going to give you the experience you need. And sometimes it's going to need more than one. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of a feel for the visuals that come with Power BI out of the box. Next, we're going to have a little look at some of the mapping visuals in the marketplace. So is everybody familiar with the visuals marketplace in Power BI? Okay, great. So this is one of the great features in Power BI, in my opinion. The ability, when Power BI doesn't quite do what you need out of the box, you have the ability to borrow from the community or sometimes other teams in Microsoft who have created that custom experience that gives you something more bespoke. And even then, sometimes that doesn't give you exactly what you need, and you have the opportunity to go away and create your own. Now, there's an ever-growing number of these visuals in the marketplace, and actually there's even more beyond the marketplace that people have just uploaded into GitHub and haven't necessarily loaded into the marketplace. These are the 8 visuals that if you go to the map section in the marketplace you will find, and I'm not going to demo all of them. I'm only going to demo 2 of them, the Mapbox visual and icon map. But what I will do is just very quickly give you a bit of a feel for what's available. So the first 2, flow map and route map, are created by the same author. And these are great visuals. They're built on top of the Bing Maps API. The flow map is really designed for showing the amount of movement between a location and lots of other locations. So if you want to show the amount of trade, say, between one country to lots of other countries, then this is a great visual for doing that. Route map, equally, again, is drawing lines on the map, and it's really designed for tracking routes. So if you've got, I don't know, a fleet of vehicles and you want to show the movement of those vehicles over time, then this might be the visual for you. Then there's the more interesting ones. We've got globe data bars, which allows you to represent bars on top of a 3D map. It's quite pretty. I'm not entirely sure whether there's that much business need for it. And if you could zoom in, actually, it might be more useful. But it might be good for demos. And 3D globe map is very similar. It draws bars and a heat map. This map, however, you can zoom in and rotate around. Then there's 2 more related maps. There's drill down cartogram and drill down choropleth, again by the same author. And in fact, I think these are now published in conjunction with Microsoft. And they're very similar to shape map, but with one key difference, and that's obviously the ability to drill down. Shape map doesn't let you drill down from one hierarchy to another, whereas these maps do. The only caution I would give you for using them is it's really, really, really picky about the format of the topo.json file that you're using to define the boundaries. And it took me a very long time to actually get mine in a format that it would accept. And then we've got the Mapbox visual. So Mapbox, a little bit like Esri, is a company whose business is all about mapping. That's all they do. The Mapbox visual, however, isn't part of the product. You do have to install it from the marketplace. It comes with a huge amount of capability, the ability to use your own bespoke background layers, which you can define inside Mapbox Studio, and we'll have a little bit of a look at that shortly. It also supports your own on-premises map server. So if you've got some really sensitive maps that you don't want to expose to the cloud, you do have the option of using the Mapbox on-premises capability for hosting those as well. It draws circles, heat maps, and choropleth maps, and we're going to build one of those in a moment, so you'll get a bit of a feeling for that capability. It also supports Power BI Report Server and Publish to Web, which some of the other maps don't. So if you're looking to do some mapping that's public-facing, then this can also be a good option. And it does support report page tooltips and drill down. And then finally, Icon Map. I'm going to cover Icon Map because I wrote it, so it would be rude not to. But I created Icon Map because even with all of those other map visuals, there's still some holes out there. There's still some things that my customers wanted to do with maps that I couldn't otherwise do with Power BI. And I'll show you some of those capabilities as well. I'm also about to release a new version of Icon Map any day now, and I'll give you a very quick preview of a couple of those features as well. So let's jump out of PowerPoint again and get back to our demo. So I'm going to stick with the crime data or at least for Mapbox. So I'm going to go to the Visuals Marketplace. So I'm going to go import from Marketplace. And maps have their own category in here. So I'm going to choose Maps. And if I scroll through here, you'll see all of those maps that I've just described. There's a couple of others in here as well, which are very specific maps. I didn't know how relevant Chinese maps would be, so I didn't include those in the slide. But as I said, there are other maps out there as well. But I'm going to select the Mapbox visual and add that into my report. Hopefully. Please do not die. Okay. The demo gods are not smiling on me today. Let's not wait for that to recover. This is what happens when you use the latest build for your demo that you haven't tested it with. Right, here we go. Fortunately, I'm slightly more prepared than I thought I might have been and already have that data loaded in another report. So let's try that again. Oh, look at that. It's well and truly died. Bear with me. Okay, has that done enough? No. Okay, let me close both of these down and we will try again. Right. Okay. I'm wondering if something's still stuck in the background. Let me just make sure Power BI has properly died. Ah, there it is, look, end task. If this doesn't work, we'll move on. Okay, so let's import from Marketplace. Third time lucky. No. Oh, yep, here we go. Right. Right, Mapbox. Let's be patient for a moment. Here we go. Good. We now have the Mapbox visual. Normally, it's a 2-second process. So I've added the Mapbox visual onto my report, and let's configure it in the same way as we normally would. So let's pull in our latitudes, and in fact, let's not do latitudes and longitudes. Let's do our London boroughs into location. And actually, as soon as you drag a field onto the Mapbox visual, the first thing you get is this message. Now, you can't do anything with Mapbox until you provide your Mapbox API key. So before you can use this map, you need to go over to the mapbox.com website and sign up for an account. You can get a free account to get the key. So let me cut and paste my key. It's quite a long series of letters and numbers, so you definitely need to cut and paste it. And then you go into the formatting settings for Mapbox and paste it here into where it says access token. Paste that in there, and now we can continue to configure our map. So let's put in crime count into color. And instead of drawing, Mapbox, as I showed, will draw circles and heat maps and all of the usual types of maps. But in our case, we're not going to draw circles. Instead, we're going to draw a choropleth map. And a little bit like the shape map, it's got a really limited set of inbuilt boundaries, but it gives us the ability to specify our own custom tile set. And this works very differently to the shape map. So what we can't do is pick our topo.json file and load it in here. What we have to do is point back to Mapbox's own servers, and they will host those layers for us. So we need to go into Mapbox and load those custom geographies in. So I'm going to go to studio.mapbox.com. Let's just log in quickly. And in this case, our geographies need to be in the GeoJSON format, not topo.json, but that's fine. We now have a tool to convert between them, so that's not an issue. And if I go, once I've logged into Mapbox Studio with my Mapbox account, I go to tile sets, and in here, we have the ability to load in our own. So it's literally just a question of selecting those GeoJSON files. Once you do that, it will whir away for a few minutes. I'm not going to do it real time in the demo because it can take 5 or 10 minutes sometimes. But once those have loaded, they appear down here. And I've loaded in my local authority, my London borough boundaries, and also our LSOA boundaries. So I've got them both in there. So let's click on the local authority one. And we need to cut and paste some information out of Mapbox Studio into my report. So let's cut and paste the map ID. And that goes in here where it says the URL. You see now we're already zooming into London. I'm going to cut and paste this information here. So the name of our layer, that goes in here. Oops, that didn't work, did it? Copy, paste. And then finally, I need to tell it what field in my GeoJSON data relates to my field in my Power BI data. So for our London boroughs, it's the London borough name, which is this field here. I paste that in there. And now, hopefully, we get our boroughs, and we can go in here and configure the coloring. Let's stick with the same sort of styling as we've been using. Oops. There we go. But the great thing about the Mapbox visual, which the other visuals we've used so far haven't supported, is that we can specify multiple levels of hierarchies of geographies in here. So I'm now going to add a second level and configure level 2 very quickly, again, which is custom one. And I'm going to paste in the details of my LSOA layer. So again, very quickly cut and paste all this information. I will try and do it quickly because I appreciate we've been through this once now. And this time it's the LSOA code and not the name. So now in my map configuration, I can drag in my LSOA field, so we get the drill down options that we're used to. And I can now, let's stick with Westminster. Actually, let's go somewhere else. Let's go to Docklands in London. Click in there, and it drills down into that particular area. I seem to have something interesting going on there with my polygons. Let's try zooming out and doing that again. I do wonder if we might have some Wi-Fi issues, actually. Because what those polygons should do as we zoom in, they get more and more and more detailed. Yeah, there we go. That one has finally updated. And you can see we can zoom in, and those polygons do get more detailed as we go further in. But Mapbox has one further piece of functionality using these choropleth maps that we haven't seen yet and certainly can't do in any of your other visuals. Let's just see if that one does load in with a bit more detail. There we go. And so far we've just specified the color in here. If we drag the crime count into size, then you'll see what this has done in a moment. Let me change the choropleth settings and change this extrusion height to something a bit smaller. Not only have we used the number of crimes to specify the color of each of those boundaries, we've also used it to specify the height. And we can rotate that map round in 3D and properly explore which regions. And this is quite a nice way, of really seeing which areas have got a high amount of crime. And this doesn't just work, one area at a time. We can zoom out and look at all of those LSOAs at the same time. It does this weird thing, though, where it zooms out. I suspect that's configurable somewhere. Let's change that extrusion height a little bit higher now we're zoomed out. And, of course, this interacts as well. So as I choose different crime types, we'll see a much different sort of pattern in those areas depending on the sort of crime. So I guess some crime is going to be more centralised around central London, and then things like, there must be vehicle crime in here somewhere. I can't see it. Yeah, there we are, which is presumably going to be more prevalent further out. So that's Mapbox. We've got a few minutes left, so let's leave crime behind. I think we've done crime to death, and have a look at something a little bit different. Really good point. So let's talk about limits, full stop. So this applies to Icon Map, Mapbox, and Esri. All three of those map visuals, instead of supporting 3,500 points, support 30,000 points. I would caution you against trying to show 30,000 things on the map at once. Mapbox uses a JavaScript library, though, that uses the graphics hardware on your machine if it's available to it. So you can get some really quite good performance with massive amounts of data on Mapbox. Don't use 30,000 points on Icon Map that I'm just about to show you, unless you're just drawing circles. It will quite happily draw 30,000 circles on the map and perform okay. But the real reason I created Icon Map was to draw icons, images on the map. And if you try and draw 30,000 images, it's not going to perform very well. It shouldn't crash the browser, but it's not going to be a nice experience. Okay, new blank report. Let's bring in some new data. And this is a very different sort of data. Obviously, it's still spatial. We need some locations to draw on the map. This time, we're going to pull in, not that one, we are going to pull in some live data, because I like taking risks, because nothing's gone wrong so far. We are going to pull in some live data from the FlightAware API. So I'm going to use the web connector and pull in, hopefully, every single aircraft that is currently in the air on its way into Atlanta right now. So that comes in as a JSON record, so I've very quickly got to parse that. Turn that into a table. Expand those out. And here we have a list of all of those aircraft. So we just do some very quick formatting. So these are the flight numbers. We've got the type of aircraft. We've got where that plane's come from, where it's going to. Obviously, it's all Atlanta. We're not too worried about the times for this. We've got the current longitude and latitude of those aircraft. We'll remove out those other fields. Oops. remove. We've got the current speed, we've got the altitude, we've got the heading, so which direction the plane is traveling in. And we probably don't need anything else as interesting as it might be. And we just need to set some data types quickly. So those three are whole numbers, and these two are decimal numbers. And let's load that in. So now in my data set, there won't be too many, I don't think. We've got 125 planes on the way into Atlanta. So let's go to the marketplace. So I like taking risks. And this time bring in icon map. We're going to use the map for the whole of a report. And I'm going to drag in the flight number, so the ident field, into category. I'm going to drag in the longitude and latitude. And incidentally, icon map, next release will have much better documentation. This map won't show anything until you drag something into the size field. Or at least this version of it won't. The new version, I fixed that. Let's do a count of idents. So basically, we've only got one of these. And now we get a little red dot representing each of the planes. And we are suffering with internet because our background layers are drawing very slowly. So I'm going to go into the data point setting, and I'm going to make our circles a little bit bigger so we can at least see where they are. So there we are. Now we've got a big, fat red circle representing each of our planes. And if we use the map visual that comes with Power BI or Esri Map or Mapbox, that's as good as we're going to get, right? Because we can only show circles or heat maps. So this was the gap that I wanted to address by creating icon map. And instead of showing circles, I want to show an image. I want to show a picture of a plane on the map, not a great big circle. So in my data, I'm going to create a new column. Let's call it icon. And I'm going to put in a URL of an image. Now, this image can be different for every single row in your data. In our case, we're just going to keep them all the same for simplicity. And I'm going to drag that icon field into the icon field well on the visual. And now, instead of circles, we get planes. But all of our planes seem to be flying to the North Pole. It's not quite the effect I'm looking for. But we do have a heading. We've got the bearing that that plane is currently flying on. So I'm going to drag that into the rotation field, and that's going to let the map visual rotate around each of our images and point in the direction of travel. So now we've got a much better effect showing where all our planes are flying, but we can't really tell where those planes have come from. We know they're going to Atlanta, but even that's not that easy to tell on here. So I'm going to pull in a lookup file, because we haven't got the longitude and latitude of all of our airports, right? We've got the 4-letter IATA code that describes what that airport is, but we don't know where those airports are. So in here, I have got a list of every airport in the world. It literally is every airport in the world, including, a strip on some farmer's field, but that's fine. So I'm going to use this field twice. I'm going to use it for the origin, and I'm going to use it for the destination. Let's load that in very quickly. And in the same way as I use the lookup files for the crime data, I'm going to need to create the relationships for the flight data. So we have got origin, that needs to relate to the ident field in my origin table, and I've got the destination, which needs to relate to the ident field in my destination table. And then because we're going to pull out the longitudes and latitudes, we need to set those cross filter directions to be both. Do this with caution. Marco Russo, if he was here, would probably kill me. But now, what we can do is, this session's recorded, isn't it? You may see this. is actually, let's do origin first. If I drag in the longitude and latitude from our airport lookup for origin into the solid line section over here, so latitude and longitude, we now get a line from where those planes have come from. And we also have a dotted line section. So let's use the destination longitudes and latitudes to draw lines. So dotted lines where the plane's flying to, and straight lines where the planes are flying from. But we're not used to seeing straight lines for this because actually the Earth is round. So it's not flat. Although some people might try and tell you it is. I'm going to go into the line section and turn on geodesic lines. So that means that our lines are now going to follow the curvature of the Earth. And we'll make those a little bit smaller. So now we've got a much better visual showing where our planes are, where they're flying to, the direction of travel, and where they've come from. Let's treat this a little bit more because I'm feeling pretty jet lagged today. If I turn on the daylight curve, which will draw the terminator of difference between light and day, we can see that it's coming up to the end of the day in the UK and it's still morning here, so that's why I'm tired. We can also bring in some other information. So in the same way as we had to supply the Mapbox API key to use the Mapbox visual, actually we can use my Mapbox API key in Icon Map, and then we get to use all of the Mapbox background layers as well, but we've already got a choice of 5 or 6 other different background layers which are free as well. But let's choose one of the Mapbox layers just to show that we can bring in Mapbox layers too. And then one further API key, I've signed up to a service called openweathermap.org, which provides real-time weather data. So let's copy that in here, and now let's have a look at precipitation so we can overlay, hopefully. There we go, some real-time weather data as well. So we can see where it's raining in the UK, in the world rather. Thanks. So that's Icon Map as it stands today. I'm bringing a couple of new features, or bringing lots of features, but there's a couple of key features that I just wanted to show you very quickly in the 2 minutes we've got left. So at the moment we're showing flight data. Let's stick with that theme very quickly and imagine that instead of just showing point data, we want to show a route that a plane's traveled. But actually, we could do that now because we can just draw lots of lines and draw all of those lines up to show a route. But what if we want to represent altitude as well? Now, one technique is to make the plane the plane icon bigger or smaller, but that doesn't work well over a route. Or we can make the line thickness bigger or smaller, but then when you've got lots of planes, then all of those lines start to overlay each other, and it becomes quite confusing. So I had the idea that actually what we could do is instead of drawing circles or lines on the map, we could draw bars, and the height of that bar would depend on the altitude of the plane at that point. So these are different planes coming into land at Heathrow Airport, each colour representing the path of one particular plane. And you can see here as on the outskirts of London, the bars are higher, and as you come closer and closer into the airport, they get lower and lower, representing the altitude going down. But how have we done this? Well, one of the new features I've added into Mapbox isn't the ability to draw bars. Instead, it's the ability to make that image a measure. And as soon as you allow a measure rather than a calculated column or something that's hard-coded in your data, you can do things dynamically in DAX. So you can see here the image URL is actually the field bar. Let me show you what sits behind that field bar. This time, it's a piece of DAX, and it's generating an SVG image. So an SVG image is a vector image, so it doesn't matter how big you make it, it's never going to get pixelated. And I'm calculating the height of that bar dynamically using DAX based on the altitude field in my data. Now, there's all sorts of possibilities in here. You can do things much more complicated than bars. You can, draw your own polygons, which actually can change based on, fields in your data or your cross-highlighting from other visuals. You can have some proper dynamic effects here appearing in your map. And then finally, in my last 15 seconds, is anybody here using spatial data in SQL Server? Yes, I found one. I'm so pleased you're here. I did wonder how popular the feature request was. I get a lot of people asking for this, but I did wonder whether it was just noise, with a few people making a lot of comments on Twitter, or whether there were actually a lot of people wanting it. Despite the fact that Microsoft has really great support for spatial data inside SQL Server, none of the maps in Power BI are capable of currently displaying that. So one of the things that I've added into the new version of Icon Map is, as well as showing images, if you pull in SQL spatial data into your data set, so these are polygons or lines or points, we can also plot those on the map. And these are first-class citizens in the map. They're not background layers. These are actually properly interactive layers on the map that exist and can be interacted with in the same way as images are, so you can select them and drill through from those polygons. But more than that, you can draw images, circles, and polygons all on the map at once. And I expect to release the new version of that by the end of the week. So it will probably take a couple of weeks to then arrive in the marketplace. Okay, I'm out of time, I believe, but I think we're at the end. Thank you very much.